Jake Morrison checked the navigation display one more time as the cargo ship, New Dawn, moved through space between Earth and Mars. The routine supply run carried medical equipment and food to the Mars colonies. Jake had made this trip hundreds of times in his 15 years as a cargo captain. Nothing ever happened on these boring runs through empty space. His crew of 12 worked quietly at their stations. Lisa Campbell sat in the medical bay checking inventory lists. Pete Collins monitored radio signals from both planets. Paul Rodriguez inspected the engine systems in the lower decks. The other crew members handled cargo management and ship maintenance. They were all civilians who had signed up for peaceful trade missions between human colonies. Jake stretched in his captain's chair and looked out at the stars. Space felt peaceful today. No solar storms or equipment problems to worry about. In 18 hours they would reach Mars and unload their cargo. Then they would pick up mineral shipments for the return trip to Earth. Simple work that paid well and kept humanity's growing colonies supplied with everything they needed. The first sign of trouble came from Pete at the communications station. He frowned at his displays and adjusted several controls. Strange readings appeared on his screens that made no sense. Energy patterns unlike anything in human technology showed up on the long-range sensors. Pete called out to Jake that something big was approaching their position. Jake moved to the sensor station and studied the readings. The object was massive and moving faster than any human ship could travel. Its energy signature was completely unknown. No human technology produced that kind of power output. Jake felt his stomach tighten as he realized they might be looking at something not made by human hands. The object dropped out of hyperspace, directly in front of the New Dawn. Jake stared in shock at the alien vessel that appeared on their main screen. The ship was 3 times larger than their cargo hauler and covered in strange metallic surfaces that seemed to shift and flow. Bright energy patterns moved across its hull like living things. No human had ever seen anything like it. Pete tried to send radio messages to the alien ship but received no response. The strange vessel just hung in space, studying them. Jake ordered his crew to prepare for possible contact with an unknown alien species. Everyone moved to emergency stations as tension filled the ship. Lisa Campbell prepared medical equipment in case someone got hurt. Paul Rodriguez checked all ship systems to make sure everything worked properly. Suddenly, the alien ship fired some kind of energy beam at the New Dawn. The beam passed right through their shields like they were made of paper. Jake felt a strange tingling sensation spread through his body as the energy surrounded him. His muscles began to feel heavy and slow. His thoughts became fuzzy and hard to focus. All around the bridge, his crew members started falling to the floor. Their bodies went limp like puppets with cut strings. Pete collapsed over his communications console. The navigation officer slumped in her chair. One by one, every crew member stopped moving as the alien energy affected their nervous systems. Jake tried to fight the strange paralysis, but his body refused to obey his commands. His arms felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. His legs would not support him anymore. He fell to the deck, unable to move, but still conscious and aware of everything happening around him. The alien ship moved closer and attached itself to the New Dawn with some kind of docking tube. Jake heard strange sounds coming from the airlock as the aliens cut through the ship's hull. Heavy footsteps echoed through the corridors as the invaders boarded his vessel. The first alien that entered the bridge was tall and thin with gray skin that looked almost metallic. It wore no clothing but had electronic devices attached to various parts of its body. Its eyes were large and dark without any visible emotion. The creature moved with fluid grace as it examined the paralyzed humans. More aliens entered behind the first one. They carried strange devices that hummed with energy. The creatures communicated with each other using sounds that hurt Jake's ears. Their language was nothing like any human speech. The aliens seemed pleased with how easily they had captured the human ship and crew. One of the aliens that looked like a scientist began scanning the paralyzed humans with a handheld device. It paid special attention to their heads and nervous systems. The creature made excited sounds when it discovered that the humans were still conscious despite being paralyzed. This seemed to surprise and interest the alien researchers. The aliens worked efficiently to secure their prisoners. They used floating platforms to move the paralyzed crew members to their ship. Jake felt helpless as strong alien hands lifted him and carried him away from his command bridge. He could see but not speak as they transported him through strange corridors, filled with pulsing lights and incomprehensible technology. Jake was placed in a small cell with walls that glowed with soft energy. The paralysis kept him motionless on the floor, but his mind remained sharp and alert. He could hear his crew members being moved to other cells nearby. The aliens had captured them all without firing a single shot or damaging their ship. As Jake lay unable to move in his alien prison, he realized that humanity had just made first contact with an advanced species. Unfortunately, the aliens seemed to view humans as specimens to be captured and studied rather than equals to communicate with. The peaceful cargo run had become something much more dangerous and unknown. Lisa Campbell lay on the cold floor of her cell and watched the alien guards through the energy barrier that kept her trapped. The paralysis from their weapons still held her body motionless, but her mind worked perfectly. She used her medical training to observe everything about their captors and look for weaknesses. The aliens moved differently than humans. Their joints bent in strange ways, and they seemed to glide rather than walk. Their skin had a metallic sheen that reflected the ship's lighting. Electronic devices were embedded directly into their bodies, like they were part machine and part living creature. Lisa counted at least 6 different types of aliens based on their size and the number of devices attached to them. Hours passed before the aliens came for Jake Morrison. 4 of the tall gray creatures entered his cell and lifted his body onto a floating platform. Lisa watched helplessly as they transported her captain away down a corridor that pulsed with red energy. She had no idea what the aliens planned to do to him, but her medical instincts told her it would not be pleasant. The alien ship was huge compared to the New Dawn. Lisa could hear machinery humming through the walls and feel vibrations from massive engines. Strange smells filled the air that reminded her of ozone and burning metal. The temperature was too cold for human comfort, and the lighting hurt her eyes with its harsh blue glare. In the laboratory, Jake found himself strapped to a table, surrounded by alien scientists. The creatures wore additional electronic devices that seemed to enhance their already advanced senses. They communicated in rapid bursts of sound while examining readouts from scanning equipment aimed at his paralyzed body. The lead scientist was taller than the others, with more devices embedded in its skull. It seemed fascinated by Jake's brain patterns and kept adjusting the scanning equipment for better readings. The creature made excited sounds when it discovered that Jake's nervous system was fighting against the paralysis weapon. No other species had ever shown such resistance. Jake felt needles pierce his skin as the aliens took blood samples and tissue specimens. The paralysis kept him from feeling pain, but he was aware of everything they did to his body. Monitoring equipment attached to his head tracked his brain activity while the scientists discussed their findings in their harsh alien language. Back in the detention area, Lisa noticed something important happening to her own body. The tingling sensation in her fingertips was getting stronger. She could barely move her fingers, but the paralysis was definitely weakening. Her medical knowledge told her that human nervous systems were adapting to the alien weapon faster than expected. Pete Collins was in the cell next to hers, and Lisa saw him trying to move his hand. His efforts were barely visible, but she could tell he was regaining some motor control. She tried to signal him by twitching her fingers in a pattern that meant Morse code. Pete's eyes showed that he understood and began responding with his own finger movements. The message Pete sent was simple but important. The paralysis was temporary and wearing off for all the crew members. The aliens had no idea that their weapon was losing effectiveness against human physiology. Pete had been listening to alien communications and learned some of their language. The creatures believed humans would remain helpless for weeks or months. On the laboratory, the alien scientists increased the power of their neural disruption field around Jake's brain. They wanted to study how human nervous systems reacted to stronger doses of their technology. The enhanced field sent waves of energy through Jake's skull that should have knocked him unconscious or killed him. Instead, something unexpected happened. Jake's brain began to adapt even faster to the alien energy patterns. New neural pathways formed in his mind that could process the disruption field without being affected by it. The alien scientists were amazed by readings that showed impossible levels of adaptation and resistance. Jake felt his thoughts becoming clearer despite the increased neural assault. The alien energy was no longer scrambling his brain patterns, but actually seemed to be enhancing his mental abilities. He began to understand fragments of the alien language and could sense the electromagnetic fields around their equipment. The lead scientists made excited sounds and called for more researchers to observe this unprecedented development. They had never encountered a species that could adapt to neural disruption technology. Every other race they had conquered had remained permanently paralyzed until the aliens chose to release them. Lisa managed to move her arm slightly and reached the small medical scanner in her pocket. The device still worked and showed that her nervous system was generating new types of electrical activity. Her brain was literally rewiring itself to resist the alien paralysis weapon. The same thing was happening to Pete and the other crew members. She realized that humans were evolving in real time to counter the alien technology. Their nervous systems were more flexible and adaptable than any species the aliens had encountered before. What the creatures saw as a fascinating biological response was actually humanity's greatest advantage. The aliens had made a critical mistake by trying to study humans instead of simply killing them. They had given the human nervous system time to analyze and adapt to their most powerful weapon. Now that adaptation was spreading through Jake's brain and making him immune to their neural control. Jake discovered he could sense the electromagnetic signatures of alien equipment through the laboratory walls. Their technology used biological neural patterns to interface with electronic systems. Now that his brain could process their energy frequencies, he was beginning to understand how their devices worked. The alien scientists continued their experiments, while Jake lay motionless on their table. They had no idea that their test subject was learning to see through their technology and understand their weaknesses. The paralysis that held his body prisoner was becoming irrelevant as his mind expanded beyond normal human limitations. Lisa felt sensation returning to her legs and knew the crew would soon be able to move freely. The aliens had captured them to study human biology, but instead had triggered an evolutionary response that would make humans their equals or superiors. The first contact that had seemed like a disaster was becoming humanity's greatest opportunity to advance beyond their current limitations and reach for the stars. 3 days had passed since the aliens captured the New Dawn, and Jake Morrison had become their most interesting test subject. The lead scientist called Yilmuth spent hours each day studying how Jake's brain continued to adapt to their neural disruption technology. Every test revealed new developments that excited the alien researchers. Jake lay on the examination table pretending to be completely paralyzed while his nervous system grew stronger and more resistant to their weapons. He had learned to hide his growing abilities from the scanning equipment by controlling his brainwave patterns. The aliens saw only what he wanted them to see, while his real capabilities expanded far beyond their understanding. During rest periods between experiments, Jake was returned to his cell where the energy barrier was designed to contain paralyzed prisoners. The aliens had no security measures for prisoners who could move because their neural technology had never failed before. Jake used these opportunities to explore his cell and memorize the guard rotation schedules. He discovered that the cell walls were actually energy fields that could be disrupted by the right electromagnetic frequency. His enhanced nervous system could now generate and control electrical impulses that affected alien technology. With careful practice, he learned to create small gaps in the energy barrier that the monitoring systems could not detect. Lisa Campbell had regained enough movement to perform basic medical examinations on herself and communicate with the other crew members through hand signals. Her scanner showed that all 12 humans were developing similar neural adaptations at different rates. Some crew members were progressing faster than others, but everyone was becoming resistant to the alien paralysis weapons. Paul Rodriguez was making the fastest progress after Jake because his engineering background helped him understand the electromagnetic principles behind the alien technology. He had figured out how to use the medical equipment in their cells to create small electromagnetic pulses that interfered with alien devices. The pulses were too weak to cause damage, but strong enough to disrupt their scanning equipment. Pete Collins had been listening to alien communications and learning their language faster than anyone expected. The neural enhancement from their experiments was improving human learning abilities along with physical resistance. Pete could now understand basic alien conversations and had discovered important information about their captors. The aliens called themselves the Zephyrian Empire and had conquered 17 different star systems using their neural disruption technology. Every species they encountered had been paralyzed and enslaved without a fight. The Zephyrians believed that neural control made them invincible and had never faced any real resistance to their expansion. Their ship was called a research vessel and was returning to the Zephyrian home system with Jake and his crew as specimens. The aliens planned to study human neural adaptation for several months before deciding whether humans would make good slaves or should be eliminated as a potential threat. They had no idea that their prisoners were becoming more dangerous with each passing day. Jake had learned to move freely within his cell during guard shift changes, when no aliens were watching the detention area. He used this time to study the ship's layout and identify critical systems that could be sabotaged. The Zephyrian vessel relied heavily on automated systems controlled by neural interfaces that were vulnerable to electromagnetic interference. The alien guards were not warriors, but scientists and technicians who had never expected to fight prisoners. They carried neural disruptor weapons, but no other defensive equipment. Their overconfidence in their technology had made them careless about basic security procedures that would have been standard on any human military vessel. Lisa discovered that human tools and equipment confiscated from the New Dawn were stored in a nearby compartment. The aliens considered human technology too primitive to be dangerous and had not bothered to destroy it. They had no understanding of how resourceful humans could be when combining simple tools with advanced knowledge. Jake began planning an escape attempt that would require coordination between all crew members. He used the gaps in his cell's energy barrier to visit other prisoners during quiet periods and explain his discoveries about alien technology. The crew was amazed to learn that Jake had become immune to neural disruption and could interfere with Zephyrian equipment. Paul Rodriguez was excited to hear about the electromagnetic vulnerabilities in alien systems and began designing improvised weapons using components from their confiscated equipment. Medical scanners could be modified to generate focused electromagnetic pulses. Communication devices could be turned into jamming equipment. Even simple tools could become effective weapons against technology that relied on delicate neural interfaces. The aliens had made their biggest mistake by underestimating human intelligence and adaptability. They assumed that any species vulnerable to neural disruption would remain helpless indefinitely. They had never encountered a race that could evolve countermeasures in real time or turn captured technology into weapons. Jake's growing abilities allowed him to sense the electromagnetic signatures of alien crew members through the ship's walls. He could track their movements and identify their daily routines. The Zephyrians followed predictable patterns that made them vulnerable to coordinated attacks by prisoners who could move freely. Lisa used her medical knowledge to identify weaknesses in alien physiology based on their body structure and the electronic devices embedded in their bodies. The Zephyrians had made themselves dependent on technology that could be disrupted or damaged. Their biological systems had adapted to work with electronic enhancements that had become critical for their survival. The crew realized that they had advantages that aliens could not understand or counter. Humans had evolved as persistent hunters who never gave up when pursuing prey. They were problem solvers who could adapt quickly to new situations. Most importantly, they were survivors who had learned to fight against impossible odds throughout their evolutionary history. Jake felt ready to put their escape plan into action. The aliens had given humans time to adapt to their most powerful weapons and learn how to fight back. The Zephyrian Empire had conquered the galaxy through technological superiority, but they were about to discover what happened when that technology failed against an enemy that refused to stay down. Jake Morrison had endured 15 torture sessions in the alien laboratory. When something fundamental changed in his brain during the latest round of experiments, Yilmuth had increased the neural disruption field to levels that should have killed any living creature, but Jake felt his consciousness expand instead of shut down. The alien energy was no longer fighting his nervous system, but flowing through it like electricity through a conductor. For the first time since his capture, Jake could sense the neural fields that surrounded him as clearly as he could see visible light. The Zephyrian technology that had seemed like incomprehensible magic was now just another tool that he understood completely. He could feel the electromagnetic patterns that controlled every device in the laboratory and knew exactly how to manipulate them. Yilmuth made excited sounds as the scanning equipment showed impossible readings from Jake's brain activity. The alien scientist had no idea that his test subject was now immune to their most powerful weapons and could interfere with their technology at will. Jake lay motionless on the examination table while learning to control his new abilities without alerting the monitoring systems. When the aliens returned Jake to his cell that night, he waited until the guard rotation reached its quietest period at 0300 ship time. The detention area was monitored by automated systems that relied on neural pattern recognition to detect conscious activity. Jake had learned to mask his brain signatures and appear unconscious, while remaining fully aware and capable of movement. He reached out with his enhanced nervous system and felt the electromagnetic field that formed his cell's energy barrier. The barrier was maintained by a control node located 3 meters away in the corridor wall. Jake focused his thoughts and sent a precisely tuned electrical pulse through the ship's power grid to overload the control node's neural interface. The energy barrier flickered and died without triggering any alarms. The ship's computer systems registered the failure as a minor power fluctuation rather than a security breach. Jake stepped through the deactivated barrier and moved silently toward the storage compartment where the confiscated equipment was. The corridor was empty and dimly lit with the blue glow that Zephyrians preferred during their rest period. Jake could sense the electromagnetic signatures of sleeping aliens through the walls and avoided areas where crew members might detect his movement. His enhanced abilities allowed him to navigate the ship like a predator stalking prey. In the storage compartment, Jake found all the equipment taken from the New Dawn, along with tools and devices from other captured species. The aliens had collected technology from across the galaxy, but considered most of it too primitive to be useful. They had no understanding of how advanced engineering principles could be applied to create weapons from basic components. Jake gathered medical scanners, communication devices, and simple tools that Paul Rodriguez could modify into electromagnetic weapons. He also found emergency rations and first aid supplies that would be needed during their escape attempt. The aliens had stored everything together without any security measures, because they believed their prisoners were permanently paralyzed. He made his way to Lisa Campbell's cell first and disabled her energy barrier with another precisely controlled electromagnetic pulse. Lisa was awake and waiting for him with her nervous system now resistant enough to allow normal movement. She had been exercising quietly to rebuild her strength, and was ready for action. Together they moved to Paul Rodriguez's cell and freed the engineer, who immediately began examining the equipment Jake had retrieved. Paul's enhanced learning abilities allowed him to understand the electromagnetic principles behind Zephyrian technology and design countermeasures using human tools. He worked quickly to modify medical scanners into focused pulse weapons that could disrupt alien neural interfaces. Pete Collins was freed next and used his knowledge of alien communications to hack into the ship's information systems. The Zeph had never encountered a species capable of learning their language so quickly and had no security protocols to prevent unauthorized access. Pete found detailed technical manuals and crew schedules that would be essential for their escape plan. One by one, the entire crew was freed from their cells and armed with improvised weapons that Paul had created from their confiscated equipment. The humans moved through the ship's corridors like soldiers. Despite being civilian cargo haulers who had never received military training, their enhanced nervous systems had awakened instincts and abilities that had been dormant in their species. Lisa used her medical knowledge to target vulnerable points in alien physiology where electromagnetic pulses would cause maximum disruption to their electronic implants. Paul deployed his improvised weapons at critical junction points throughout the ship to create cascading system failures. Pete jammed alien communications and took control of internal security networks. The first aliens to discover the escape attempt were night shift technicians who encountered Jake and his crew in a primary corridor. The Zephyrians tried to use their neural disruptor weapons, but the devices had no effect on humans who were now immune to their energy patterns. Jake and his people moved with coordinated precision to overwhelm their captors. Before alarms could be raised, the captured aliens were paralyzed by their own weapons, modified by Paul to target Zephyrian neural patterns instead of human ones. The crew discovered that aliens who had made themselves dependent on electronic enhancements were extremely vulnerable when those systems were disrupted or damaged. They fell helplessly when their technology failed them. Jake led his people toward the ship's bridge while Paul continued to deploy electromagnetic weapons that crippled Zephyrian systems throughout the vessel. The aliens were awakening to find their technology failing and their prisoners free, but they had no experience fighting an enemy that could resist their primary weapons and turn their own equipment against them. Emergency alarms began sounding as the ship's automated systems detected multiple failures and unauthorized personnel in restricted areas. The Zephyrians had never needed security protocols for escaped prisoners because neural disruption had always been completely effective. They were unprepared for humans who fought back with intelligence, determination, and weapons that exploited weaknesses in alien technology. Jake felt the electromagnetic signatures of panicking aliens throughout the ship as they realized their empire's greatest advantage had become useless against these strange new enemies. The neural disruption technology that had conquered 17 star systems could not stop 12 humans who had learned to adapt and fight back against impossible odds. The Zephyrian Empire had built its power on the simple belief that neural disruption made them invincible against any enemy. For 3 centuries they had conquered world after world by paralyzing entire populations with their weapons, then enslaving or destroying anyone who might resist. No species had ever developed immunity to their technology or fought back effectively. Admiral Kethver stood on the bridge of his research vessel watching his crew panic as human prisoners moved freely through their ship. The impossible was happening around him, and he had no idea how to respond. Every tactical manual in the Zephyrian military assumed that neural weapons would always work against enemy forces. Jake Morrison appeared at the bridge entrance with his crew armed with weapons that the Admiral did not recognize. The human captain moved with confidence and purpose that reminded Kethver of apex predators from his home world. There was something different about these creatures that made the Admiral's survival instincts scream warnings. Paul Rodriguez had spent the last hour systematically destroying critical systems throughout the ship using electromagnetic pulses targeted at Zephyrian neural interfaces. Life support remained functional, but weapons, shields, and propulsion were offline. The ship was effectively dead in space and completely defenseless against any attack. Pete Collins had taken control of the communication array and was transmitting everything they had learned about Zephyrian technology and military capabilities. The signal was not going to human colonies as the aliens expected, but to Zephyrian fleet bases throughout their empire. Pete was broadcasting their own classified information back to them, along with detailed scans of human neural adaptation. The hijacked transmission included complete technical specifications for Zephyrian weapons, ship designs, and military codes. More importantly, it contained brain scans showing how human nervous systems had adapted to resist neural disruption. Any Zephyrian commander who received the signal would know that their primary advantage had been neutralized by an unknown enemy. Jake approached Admiral Kethver and spoke in perfect Zephyrian language that he had learned during his torture sessions. His pronunciation was flawless and his grammar more sophisticated than most native speakers could manage. The neural enhancement from alien experiments had given him abilities that surpassed normal human limitations. He told the Admiral that the Zephyrian Empire had made a critical mistake by capturing humans instead of avoiding them completely, had awakened something that had been sleeping in human genetics since their species first learned to make tools and wage war. The aliens had given humanity the knowledge and motivation needed to become their greatest enemy. Lisa Campbell was documenting everything about Zephyrian physiology and technology using medical scanners that revealed weaknesses in their biological systems. The aliens had modified themselves with electronic implants that enhanced their capabilities but also created vulnerabilities that could be exploited. They had made themselves dependent on technology that humans could now disrupt or control. Admiral Kethver ordered his remaining crew to send a distress signal to the nearest Zephyrian military base, but Pete Collins had already anticipated this move. The communication array was completely under human control, and any message the aliens tried to send would be redirected to serve human purposes instead. Pete modified the distress signal to include detailed information about human locations throughout the Sol system, along with false data suggesting that Earth's defenses were much stronger than they actually were. Any Zephyrian fleet that responded to the call would find themselves facing prepared enemies who knew their weaknesses and could counter their primary weapons. Paul Rodriguez discovered that the alien ship's database contained complete records of every world the Zephyrians had conquered, along with detailed information about the species they had enslaved. Hundreds of civilizations had been destroyed or subjugated by neural disruption technology that was now useless against human resistance. Jake realized that humanity had a responsibility to liberate the galaxy from Zephyrian tyranny. His species had been given the tools and knowledge needed to free billions of enslaved beings across 17 star systems. The aliens had accidentally created their own destroyers by trying to study human/neural adaptation. The crew began downloading everything from the ship's computers, including star charts, military installations, and political structures of the Zephyrian Empire. The information would allow human forces to strike at critical targets and coordinate with resistance movements on conquered worlds. The aliens had handed humanity the keys to their entire civilization. Admiral Kethver watched helplessly as the humans stripped his ship of every piece of valuable information and technology. He had spent his career conquering primitive species that submitted immediately to neural weapons. He had never faced an enemy that could adapt and fight back with increasing effectiveness. Lisa discovered that many species enslaved by the had natural resistance to neural disruption that had been suppressed by constant exposure to the technology. If the weapons were removed, these populations might recover their independence and join a rebellion against their oppressors. The galaxy was full of potential allies waiting to be freed. Paul managed to get the ship's engines working again and set course for Earth while the crew continued gathering intelligence. They would return home with complete knowledge of an alien empire that had made humanity its enemy. The peaceful cargo run had become an intelligence mission that would change the balance of power in the galaxy. Jake stood over the defeated admiral and explained that the first human the Zephyrians captured would be the last one they ever touched willingly. Humanity had learned everything needed to destroy their empire and free their slaves. The aliens had created their own worst nightmare. By underestimating the adaptability and determination of human beings, Admiral Kethfer realized that his species had made contact with something far more dangerous than they had imagined. The humans were not just another primitive race to be conquered, but apex predators who had been sleeping until someone was foolish enough to wake them up. The Zephyrian Empire had signed its own death warrant by capturing Jake Morrison and his crew. When Jake Morrison and his crew returned to Earth 6 months after their capture, the planet had already begun to change in ways that surprised even them. The neural adaptation that had saved them from Zephyrian slavery was spreading through humanity faster than anyone had expected. Children born after the first contact event showed enhanced brain development and natural resistance to electromagnetic manipulation. Earth's governments had received the intelligence data transmitted by Pete Collins and immediately understood the threat facing human civilization. An alien empire that had conquered 17 star systems was now aware of humanity's existence and would certainly return with larger forces. The peaceful age of human expansion was over before most people realized it had begun. Military leaders studied the captured Zephyrian technology and realized that traditional human weapons would be useless against enemies who could paralyze entire armies with neural disruption fields. The only effective defense was the neural immunity that humans were developing through exposure to alien energy patterns. Earth needed immune soldiers to fight an enemy that could disable normal humans instantly. Jake found himself promoted from cargo captain to commander of humanity's first interstellar defense force. His enhanced abilities made him immune to Zephyrian weapons and capable of interfering with their technology. Military scientists wanted to study his neural patterns and replicate his immunities in volunteer soldiers who would form Earth's space combat units. Lisa Campbell became the lead researcher for human neural enhancement programs that would prepare the species for galactic warfare. Her medical knowledge of alien physiology and Zephyrian weaknesses was essential for developing tactics that could defeat technologically superior enemies. She worked around the clock to train immune humans in combat medicine and alien biology. Paul Rodriguez led engineering teams that reverse-engineered captured Zephyrian technology and improved it using human innovation. The aliens had built their devices for neural control and conquest, but humans modified them for liberation and defense. Alien weapons, designed to enslave, were converted into tools for freeing the oppressed peoples of the galaxy. Pete Collins established Earth's first interstellar communication network using hijacked Zephyrian frequencies and protocols. He made contact with resistance movements on conquered worlds and began coordinating a galaxy-wide rebellion against the Empire. Enslaved species who had given up hope learned that immune humans were coming to help them fight for freedom. The first human warships launched 18 months after first contact, carrying crews of immune soldiers equipped with modified alien technology. The vessels were fast and heavily armed with weapons designed specifically to exploit weaknesses in Zephyrian defenses. Human engineers had improved alien designs using principles the original builders had never considered. Admiral Kethfer remained imprisoned on Earth and watched through his cell window as human battle fleets departed for Zephyrian space. His warnings to the Empire about human capabilities had been ignored by commanders who believed neural weapons were absolutely effective against any enemy. The Zephyrian leadership could not accept that their primary advantage had become worthless. Jake commanded the lead assault on the first Zephyrian military base that controlled 3 conquered star systems. The human fleet arrived to find alien defenders who immediately tried to disable them with massive neural disruption fields. The weapons that had conquered civilizations had no effect on immune humans who attacked with focused determination. Zephyrian ships were designed for controlling paralyzed enemies, rather than fighting opponents who could resist their primary weapons. Human forces equipped with electromagnetic pulse weapons systematically destroyed alien technology while freeing enslaved populations who joined the rebellion. World after world was liberated by immune humans and grateful former prisoners. The species that had been conquered by neural disruption did not simply thank their human liberators and return to peaceful lives. They had centuries of anger and hatred stored up against their Zephyrian oppressors and wanted revenge for generations of slavery. The galaxy erupted in rebellions that the Empire could not contain or control. Lisa discovered that the neural immunity spreading through humanity was being passed to other species through bioelectric field interactions during close contact. Humans who worked closely with alien refugees were sharing their resistance to neural weapons. The immunity was becoming a galactic phenomenon rather than just a human advantage. The Zephyrian Empire found itself fighting enemies on hundreds of worlds simultaneously while their primary weapon became increasingly useless. Immune populations grew larger every month as the resistance spread from system to system. The empire that had been built on technological superiority was crumbling as that technology failed. Paul Rodriguez led human engineering teams that studied captured Zephyrian industrial facilities and learned to mass-produce advanced technology using human manufacturing techniques. Earth became the center of weapons production for the Galactic Rebellion, with improved versions of alien technology flowing to resistance forces throughout the Empire. Admiral Kethva received regular updates about the collapse of his civilization, and understood that the Zephyrians had committed species suicide by capturing Jake Morrison. They had awakened humanity's potential for warfare and given them the tools needed to destroy an interstellar empire. The first human they touched had become the catalyst for their destruction. Jake stood on the bridge of his flagship as human forces approached the Zephyrian home system for the final assault. He sent a message to the alien leadership, reminding them that they had started this war by capturing and torturing innocent humans. The species that had ruled the galaxy through fear was about to learn what happened when they made enemies of natural-born fighters. The Zephyrian Empire fell in 18 months after 3 centuries of dominance. It had taken them longer to build their civilization than it took immune humans to destroy it. The neural disruption technology that had seemed invincible was useless against enemies who could adapt and evolve countermeasures in real time. Jake Morrison had started the war as a simple cargo captain hauling supplies between human colonies. He ended it as the commander who liberated hundreds of worlds and freed billions of enslaved beings. The Zephyrians had made their greatest mistake when they decided to capture the first human they encountered instead of avoiding humanity completely. Galaxy was free and humanity had earned its place among the stars, not through peaceful exploration but through the oldest human tradition of fighting. For those who could not fight for themselves, the species that had learned to survive through warfare had found worthy enemies at last and proven that some things in the universe were still worth fighting for.